Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, we are going to stretch those full panel dies with a few techniques that focus on rotating those die cuts. These are the two new Waffle Flower products I'll be using today. On the left is the Wreath stamp set and die. The matching die is on the back. It's a really sweet little set. I'm going to show you some really cool partial inking techniques with that. And this is the really awesome Herringbone Combo Set. Comes with this gorgeous herringbone full panel die, and you get some sentiments that fit in the center of the die cut as well. So a really great versatile set. We're going to start today's cards with the Herringbone full panel die. This beautiful die not only cuts this beautiful herringbone pattern, but it also adds some stitch details, which I think are really pretty. We're going to die cut it out of some contact paper. I just trimmed a piece off here that's a little bit bigger than the die, and it's from a roll of contact paper. If you haven't seen me use contact paper before, I use it a lot. We're going to create a mask with it. It's basically typically used to line shelves or drawers, but this is a sticky material that's going to work great for masks, but it's not too sticky that you can't remove it off of your paper cleanly. So I just ran the contact paper through my die cutting machine, and so now I have this sticky mask of that herringbone pattern. So I'm just going to stick that down onto an A2 panel of 110-pound white cardstock. Smooth it out with my fingers a little bit just to make sure it's nice and stuck down, and then I'm going to start ink blending. I have some Distress Oxides picked out. The first color I'm using is Worn Lipstick, and I'm going to lightly blend all over this A2 panel, making sure I get in all those openings of the mask to transfer basically that herringbone pattern. I love to use contact paper for masks that I ink blend on top of. The contact paper is a little bit slick, so you just glide over the surface of the contact paper so easily. It really is a dream to use for masking when you ink blend. So I just carefully kind of peeled that off after I finished my ink blending, and then I rotated the panel around. So I'm rotating this mask around. So now the herringbone the angle of the herringbone pattern is at a different angle now, and this is going to crisscross kind of over the herringbone pink pattern that I just did, and it's going to make a really nice, almost gingham-like or candy cane stripe-esque kind of pattern. So I'm now ink blending over the mask again, this time with a red. I'm using Barn Door Distress Oxide. And once I finish ink blending the whole panel, I'll carefully remove the mask, and I have my ink blending is done. And I'll hold it to the camera here so you can see that really cool kind of pattern that we got simply by rotating our panel die or a panel mask around. So really cool. I love how they crisscross and match up really well. I also want to show you that you can save these contact paper masks. I just cleaned mine off with a damp chamois and then put it back on the contact paper backing, and I can store that away with the die set and use it again later. So now I'm going to move on to this super sweet Wreath stamp set. I'm going to stamp one of the critters from this set, and I found the best way to stamp this kind of layered critter is to start with the eye and nose, that tiniest stamp. I know that seems a little strange, but it's a lot easier to kind of make your larger stamps kind of fit over than it is to try to get that tiny stamp to fit in the right spot of your larger image, basically the whole body of the critter. So I just inked up, even though this is one stamp, I inked the eye up in VersaFine Onyx Black, and I inked the nose up in Worn Lipstick Distress Oxide and stamped it. Now I'm going to move on to that body of the critter, the large stamp. I just was able to easily kind of position that eye opening and nose opening over my previously stamped image and then ink this up and stamp it. I'm going to do some partial inking. I first am stamping this critter in Tea-Dye Distress Oxide, and before I clean it, so my stamp is still dirty here, I stamped it twice in the Tea-Dye, and now I'm going to take some Vintage Photo Distress ink and do some partial inking. I'm angling my little mini ink pad here. The mini one makes it a lot easier, and I'm just partially inking up the edges of this stamp. Not all the edges, just a few. Once I have it pretty well inked up the way I want, then I'm going to take my finger and kind of clean up anywhere it's not like a nice gradation where I have any harsh lines from the ink pad. I'll kind of remove those or soften a little bit with my finger. I'm just cleaning my finger after I wipe it a little bit on my damp chamois off camera, and now I'll hold it to the camera so you can see my partial inking here. So I still have some residual Tea-Dye Distress Oxide on there, and then did my partial inking with the Vintage Photo Distress ink, and I think that combo of the oxide and the ink makes beautiful, beautiful ombre stamping or partial inking on your images. See how soft and pretty that is? I think that's the key. So if you've ever had any difficulty getting those nice gradations just with ink, try that combo of Distress Oxide first and then doing some Distress ink for your partial inking. I think you'll be really happy with your ombre that way. So I quickly stamped the cheek in Worn Lipstick Distressed Oxide. Now I'm moving on to the scarf. I'm going to do some partial inking on the scarf as well. So I started with Mowed Lawn Distress Oxide, stamped that. I'm not going to clean my stamp. I'm going to make sure I leave that residual Mowed Lawn on there and then do some partial inking with Pine Needles Distress ink. Just kind of ink up the bottom edge of that scarf and then stamp it, and that creates a beautiful ombre on that scarf, really creates the illusion of roundness. And I think leaving that residual ink on the stamp is also a key component to creating a nice gradation. Now I'm moving on to a ribbon or a bow from the Merry Wreath stamp set. Again, I'm going to do some partial inking. So first stamped the bow in Barn Door Distress Oxide. Now I'm moving on to Fired Brick Distress ink, partially inking up kind of the tails of that bow and the bow parts, the edges of the bow, and then stamping that bow, and again creating a nice gradation on that bow. Now I'm going to move on to the wreath. So this wreath is actually a layered stamp, so there's 3 stamps to create this beautiful wreath. I'm going to start with the main body of the wreath and stamp it in Mowed Lawn Distress Oxide. Stamped it a couple times just so I got nice good coverage for that wreath. Now I'm going to move on to the next layer, which is the berries. Got that centered up, and now I'm going to do some partial inking, just really easy here. I'm going to first stamp it in Worn Lipstick Distress Oxide, and then I'm going to do some partial inking with Barn Door Distress ink, just kind of inking up the edges of those berries, and that just adds a little bit more color, and I think it makes them a little bit more interesting. Here you can see kind of that little bit of color that I added to those berries with that red. Now I'm moving on to the third and final layer stamp for this wreath. I find that this layer can be a little tricky to line up, but if you look at the outer edge, there's some kind of pieces sticking out. Use those sticking out pieces on the outer edge to help you line up with the leaves that are sticking out on your stamped image, and I think that will make it a lot easier. I just stamped this, inked this up in Pine Needles Distress ink and stamped it, and now you can see that darker green creates a lot of shadow and a lot of depth. Not a lot of partial inking needed for that wreath. It's so beautiful with all the layer stamps. So I went ahead and die cut those images out with the matching dies, and then I popped my wreath here into my MISTI as well as the negative from my wreath, and I popped that inside the wreath, and I'm going to just stamp on that negative piece there with a sentiment from the Herringbone Sentiments stamp set, and just stamped it in VersaFine Onyx Black. Now I'm going to create some frames here. I first die cut an A2 panel of 110 pound white cardstock with the largest die from the A2 Nesting Rectangles die set, which adds a stitched border. Then I took a die from the A2 Layers die set and die cut, so that creates my frame. Now I'm going to take the two dies again from the A2 Layers and die cut a frame out of red, and I also actually die cut those 2 layers out of white cardstock again and created another white frame the same size as the red. I decided I wanted a little bit more dimension on that inner frame. So I'm now ready to put together my card, so I'm going to take that ink blended herringbone panel and glue it down onto my A2 top folding card base. Then I'll glue down that stitched frame that I created out of the white cardstock, just glue that guy down. Then I'll move on to that inner frame. Again, like I mentioned, I also cut this smaller white frame as well that matches that red one, and I'm going to glue that down first. I just wanted a little bit more dimension here. Just wanted that little inside frame to pop a little bit more. And now I'm going to glue down this red frame directly on top to that smaller white inner frame. Once I get that stuck down, I'm ready to kind of move on to my wreath. So I also wanted a little dimension on my wreath, so I die cut the wreath 2 more times out of some white cardstock, just some scrap cardstock. I'm going to glue those 2 layers together here, and once I get those stuck together, then I'll grab my stamped wreath and attach it right on top, and that will just add a little bit of dimension. Now I'm going to pop in this negative piece that has my sentiment stamped on it. Just kind of rotate this around till I find where it fits. Once I get it in, I'll add some liquid adhesive to the backside of this wreath and my sentiment. And you may have noticed the lines on the backside of my cardstock here. That's because I'm using some scrap cardstock. This is actually Waffle Flower has a Creative Monthly set, and some well, the misprinted or slightly damaged cardstock here that I'm using, and the backside is perfect, so I use it for cards. So I just added the bow with a little bit of craft foam to pop it up, and then glued it onto the wreath, and then I also added some foam tape to the backside of my little critter and stuck him down so it looks like he's putting that bow on the wreath. We'll take a closer look at that card once I finish my second card. So the second card is a really simple card, kind of like a bonus card here, but still involving that idea of rotating the die cut. So I die cut out of the herringbone panel some green cardstock and some white cardstock, stamped on the white cardstock my sentiment, and now I've just rotated that green one the other way around, so my herringbone diagonals kind of crisscross, and I think it makes a really cool pattern, lots of dimension, almost like lattice work. Kind of crazy how it has a different look. Now I put the two together and I noticed that I can kind of see the green diamond through the beyond the white one here on the front. I didn't like that, so I realized if I just kind of slid the white panel down a little bit, it completely covered that back diamond of green. So I'm going to trim it off here, kind of trace where I need it to go, and then just trim off that excess of green at the top now. Just use my paper trimmer and trimmed it off. It basically cuts right along the stitched line at the top there. And then I'm going to glue these together, so I just added some adhesive to the back side of my white herringbone panel and stuck the two together, and you can see it covers it completely nice and neat. Now I'll add some adhesive to the backside of the green and stick it down onto my red card front here. And once I get that stuck down, this simple card is complete. You can also play around with this idea too with specialty papers. Here I just use colored cardstock. I really like the look. I think it's very, very festive, very Christmassy. But here's one I created too with some glitter red cardstock in the very back. A little bit hard to see on camera. You can see it better in person, but it might be fun to try this layering of cardstocks with specialty paper. I think that might be fun too. So here is that finished card that we created with the partial inking and the masked background using the herringbone panel die, as well as some Con-Tact paper, a really easy way to kind of stretch that die. And I love the different looks we got simply by rotating that panel around. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. If you want any more information on the products I use, please check out the links below in the description. You can also follow me on Instagram or check out my blog. I'll share those links as well. And if you like this video, I'd love for you to subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day.